Hi, welcome to Planetary Calendars, Astro Portraits. I'm Ralph Dimitas, one of the calendar's astrologers, along with Lonnie Dimitas. Now, remember, you can find our portraits every Tuesday. You'll find those at Planetary Calendar Astrology on YouTube, and you can find our forecast for the coming week based upon the calendar on Fridays. You can also find the calendars at planetarycalendar.com. Robert Downey Jr. is our forecast, is our portrait for this week. He's born April 4th, 1965 at 1:10 p.m. in New York, New York, which typically means Manhattan. He's born with the sun at 14 degrees Aries, with, interestingly, Venus conjunct the sun, closely conjunct the sun from 12 degrees to 14 degrees. People who have that position typically are very charming. They're very likable. They're very nice looking. Venus conjunct the sun. And this is an Aries, so he would tend to be very, very engaging, very quick to engage with other people. He also has Mercury in Aries at 21 degrees retrograde. Interesting, right? Retrograde. This is someone who actually spends more time talking to themselves and thinking about stuff before they say it than you would actually think with an Aries. You just think the Aries just blurted out. Not so much with him. He really does consider what he's going to say. He also has Vesta at 29 degrees Aries. So it means that he has a very strong sense of mission. But his mission has a lot to do with self-development. Okay? He's got Leo rising. So his sun at 14 degrees is trine within 1 degree, his rising at 13 degrees Leo. Boy, do you see the Leo rising. And this is coming from the 9th house. You really see it. In any situation, he always wants to step to the front. He is a guy that if you were doing a play with him, he would upstage you all the time, given half a chance. And not really meaning to. He just would. And you see it even in the Avengers series. He always kind of like stepped forward into the leadership position, oftentimes in a very brash way, which was actually very authentic to those Venus, Sun, Mercury in Aries. So a very energized person. Interestingly, he has the moon in Taurus. So it's heading towards the waxing crescent moon. It's funny, we just did the chart for Chris Hemsworth, and he had the same thing. He had the Leo sun and Virgo moon, the waxing crescent. This is someone the energy is being unbound. It's starting to express itself as someone who's got a lot of optimism. So he's got this very strong fire trine between the rising and the sun. And then he's got this moon in Taurus in the 10th house. Taurus at the midheaven. He's at the 10th house midheaven, which means that career is real important to him. Standing up and being recognized was very important to him when you have the midheaven in the 10th house, with the moon and Jupiter there. Now that's interesting. The moon and Jupiter are there, which means, prominence, but the Jupiter's at 26 degrees Taurus. And I just read a very interesting article by another astrologer, about the importance of the star Algol, which is at 26 degrees Taurus, in the charts of the royal family of England, and how many times it shows up. And it's considered a difficult chart. And what's interesting is that there's two ways of viewing Algol. Algol could be the Medusa, that which is dangerous to men. But the other way to view the myth of a Medusa is that here she was just living her home, and men kept trying to come and kill her. And she kept defending herself until finally she was defeated. So it has a lot to do with feminine oppression by men. There's that other side of the coin. And it's by his moon. There's a certain real sensitivity to women and to victimhood that he senses. There's you always sense there's a certain darkness to him. This is someone who's really gone into the depths and has had challenges with addiction, and also challenges with the law in the process. So he's gone through a lot of depths. But so he's got this big trine and fire, and then you have a trine between the moon, Jupiter, and Earth to Mars, Uranus, and Pluto in Virgo. From the 10th house, an Earth house, Capricorn's house, to the 2nd house, Taurus's house. So a very earthy place, in the same way that the rising and the sun are in fire houses. So it's got a real mix of earth and fire combined together, which is really interesting. It's really an interesting component here of earth and fire. You think like volcanoes. And you often have a feeling with him, he's like on the verge of erupting. Don't you? I mean, he has a real like internalized fire that's going on all the time. Now, the Mars, Uranus, and Pluto are very close together, 10 degrees, 11 degrees, and 14 degrees. And that Uranus conjunct his Mars, and is also by his part of fortune at 18 degrees, is something you see with people who become very famous. When Uranus shows up on an angle, conjunct a major planet, the sun, the moon. In his case, it's Mars as the leading planet with Pluto. It could be the real potential to being globally famous, especially with the part of fortune there. Now, you would say, well, it's not at the rising, but where it is, it's the first visible planet. And this is a trick you can use in charts. When people encounter the world and people meet you, the first thing they see is your rising. And the next thing they see is the next planet counterclockwise in the chart, like you count through the first house, second house, third house, fourth house. Whichever planet it sees next, no matter what house it's in, that's a visible planet. That's what people recognize. So people see the Mars in Virgo, and it's actually Mars in Virgo retrograde. Mars in Virgo retrograde. There's a lot of internalized energy here. This is someone who is physically very perfectionistic about what they're doing, and they internalize it. Mars doesn't like being retrograde. It's a very frustrating position. So he's very controlled in his actions. And you find this a lot of times in actors, very strong Virgo, because they're perfectionistic and they follow instructions. Being a very successful actor has to do with, you got to learn all your lines. You got to know where you're supposed to stand. You have to do all your actions. And in film especially, you have to be able to do it again and again and again and again and again in very close to the same way. That's really challenging, but it's actually something that Virgo does really well. They're very good at, I'm going to work on this until I get it perfect, no matter how long it takes. No matter how long it takes. And he's got that in the second house as a major resource for him. So he got this Earth, he's got the Mercury retrograde in the ninth house. And then it's interesting, he has Neptune in the fourth house in Scorpio, opposite the moon exactly. So there were things about his early home life at 19 degrees Scorpio that probably prompted him to having alcohol or drug issues, or issues with pharmaceuticals. It's just something that probably came up from an early childhood. It was retrograde, so he very much internalized it. And then he had, trine that is Saturn and Chiron in the eighth house. Saturn in Pisces in the eighth house with Chiron and Ceres, but the planet of, the Saturn, the planet of responsibility in the eighth house of shared responsibility in Pisces, the planet of, the sign of dreaminess. You could really see how this could be a challenge for him. Definitely a challenge for him. It's interesting that I know his acting, but I really don't know much about his family life, but he has Leo rising opposite the Leo. On the seventh house is Pallas Athena at 13 degrees Aquarius, and Juno at 5 degrees Aquarius. Very much wanted to have a partner, was very, very inclined to have a partner who was unusual, or very different from him, or very modern, especially because that Aquarius goes back to that Saturn in Pisces. It would probably meet him in a bar, or meet him in some type of situation where, drugs and dreaminess, or it could also be through the theater too. Remember, Pisces has a lot to do with the theater, has a lot to do with imagination, has a lot to do with that. What's interesting is that he doesn't have the chart of a director, for instance, even though he has Leo rising, because for that you'd have to have more planets in the 12th house. You see that with a lot of them, more planets in the 12th house. So this is a person who has that Moon and Jupiter in the 10th house, a real drive towards being successful, a certain amount of stubbornness in his personality, which again, like I said, the algol, that deep energy going on. The sun in Aries with Venus, a great deal of charm. People like him a great deal. Mercury in Aries, great engaging skills. The Mars, Uranus, and Pluto in Virgo in the second house, a great deal of sizzle, a sense of perfectionism. Leo rising, loves the attention, has no problem getting up in front of people, just shines when he does that. And then the Saturn in the eighth house. So has had real challenges in terms of deception, in terms of how he manages his shared resources. His North Node, it's funny, his North Node is in Gemini in the 11th. His South Node is in Sagittarius in the 5th. So it's very easy for him to kind of step out and be creative. That's Sagittarius in the 5th house. He's a very naturally creative person. But the North Node, Gemini in the 11th house, the willingness to engage with people as friends on a light note, that takes work for him. That's work. But when he does that, on an intellectual basis, not a visceral basis, not a physical basis, with Venus and Aries, he wants to get up close and personal with people. He wants to touch them. Leo, they want to be close to people, but to do it on an intellectual basis, that's something that he really benefit from. He really grows through that, So it's a very interesting chart. I think it's hysterical that, of course, one of the roles he's most known for is Iron Man, which his suit is red, Aries, with gold highlights, Leo rising. It's practically he was practically born for this role, or the role was created for him in terms of that. He's just the perfect person to play it. So that's Robert Downey Jr., April 4th, 1965, 1:10 p.m., New York, New York. This is Planetary Calendar Astrology on YouTube. We do our portraits every Tuesday. We do our forecast for the coming week based upon the calendar every Friday. And you can find the calendars at planetarycalendar.com. Until next time, be well.